All right, so while I'm out today, you're going to be taking notes on viruses, bacteria, and fungi, or fungi, however you want to pronounce it. Like I said, I've had college professors that have pronounced it both different ways, so I'm not even entirely sure. So what we're going to do is look at how these cells differ from other cell types. There we go. And from each other. We'll start off with viruses. Viruses, to me, are a pretty interesting thing. And one of the things that makes them so interesting to me is the fact that they're not even alive. We talk about all these viruses invading our cells and reproducing and making us sick. I think the mind-boggling thing about viruses is they're not actually living things. Back when I was in college taking biology, we were told there are three different things that something has to possess in order to be classified as living. One, it had to have some kind of genetic information. It had to have some kind of genetic code. And viruses have that. Second thing, it has to be able to consume energy. Viruses don't. And the third thing that has to have is the ability to reproduce on its own. And viruses don't. Viruses only have one of the three criteria that something has to be classified as a living thing. So viruses are not alive. In many respects, that's why we humans have a hard time dealing with viruses. We can't cure the common cold. We can't cure the common cold because how do you kill something that's not living? It's a conundrum. It's a regular mystery. It's an enigma. So viruses are non-living particles. They are made up of nucleic acids, that genetic information, some in the form of DNA, some in the form of RNA. It just depends on the specific virus that you're looking at. But they do have nucleic acids. They do have genetic material. They satisfy that one criteria for living things. And that genetic material is surrounded by either proteins or a lipid protein coat. You see a basic illustration of what a virus looks like here on the right side of the screen. The envelope, that's the outside coating. Inside of it, you have a capsid that further encapsulates or surrounds that genetic material, the nucleic acid, the genome there on the very inside. Not much to it. You'll note there's no organelles in there. Because there's no organelles in there, they can't do basic life processes. They're not living things. They do cause many diseases in living organisms, such as COVID-19, the one viral disease that I guess sticks in everybody's minds nowadays because it's so recent. But beyond that, the common cold is a virus, flus are viruses, HIV, the human immunovirus. There's a lot of viruses out there, all causing significant diseases for human beings. Viruses are extraordinarily small, incredibly small, teeny, tiny little things. Smaller than bacteria, smaller than prokaryotic cells. At the bottom of the screen there, I've given you an illustration to help you visualize, help you understand just how small viruses are. So on the very left, we have a red blood cell. That is a eukaryotic cell. That's the kind of cell we find in our bodies. Next to that is E. coli, a bacteria. This is one of your prokaryotes. You can see that the bacteria, the prokaryote, is much smaller than the eukaryote. Next to that is a lysosome, one of the components of eukaryotes. Lysosomes are those organelles that contain the enzymes that are used to digest carbohydrates, proteins, and lipids. It's a rather small organelle. Next to that, you see some viruses. And those viruses are all smaller than the lysosome. We have the influenza virus. That's the one that causes the flu. We have the HIV virus, human immunovirus. And then next to that, SARS-CoV-2, another COVID-type virus. Viruses do not have cytoplasm or organelles. They are incredibly simple structures. They cannot carry out cellular functions such as metabolism because they don't have any organelles. Viruses cannot grow by dividing. They don't do binary fission like prokaryotes do. They don't do mitosis and meiosis like the eukaryotes do. In fact, they cannot reproduce on their own. Again, one of the things that living things have to be able to do. Viruses can't do it. To reproduce, a virus has to invade a living cell. Then what they'll do is they'll use that cell's ribosomes, enzymes, ATPs, and other resources to make new copies of the virus. So here's our virus in our illustration. It'll attach to the human cell. That's what the spike proteins do on coronavirus. They attach to the human cell. Once they're attached to the human cell, they release their genetic material into that cell. It then uses the cell's organelles, the host cell's organelles, to make new copies of that RNA and to assemble new viruses. So basically, the virus injects the instructions for making a new virus into the human cell. Then the human cell makes new viruses. And once they're done, they're released from the host cell. Or they will then invade another cell and reproduce, and on and on and on and on. But they cannot reproduce unless they can get into a host cell. Viruses come in many different shapes and sizes, and here are just a few examples. We have HIV, the human immunodeficiency virus, causes the disease AIDS. Next to that, we have a bacteriophage. There's the flu virus. And again, you'll see the flu virus looks pretty similar to what coronavirus does. They're not far off from one another. An adenovirus, the tobacco mosaic virus, and Ebola virus on the very end there. The Ebola virus is a very scary one. It has very, very high mortality rates. It causes you to bleed from your eyes and your internal organs. It's nasty, nasty. I worry about it more than coronavirus. So again, these are some examples of viruses and just examples of how they are found in many different shapes and sizes. All very similar in structure, though. There's some kind of capsule. Within that capsule, you find either RNA or DNA, depending on the type of virus you're looking at. Again, there are no organelles there. You don't see any mitochondria, no Golgi apparatus, no ribosomes, no nothing. It's just a capsule full of genetic material. That's it. A lot of the other structures you see, like the spikes, the legs, those are the mechanisms by which they attach to their host cells. Those are just proteins that bind to receptors on the host cells, allowing them to inject their DNA. Now, viruses are quite different from bacteria. Both of them have many different shapes and sizes. This picture is an example of some of the different shapes of bacteria. So like viruses, bacteria come in very different shapes and sizes. But that's kind of where the similarities end. Bacteria are much larger than viruses. Again, bacteria are much smaller than eukaryotes. Viruses are much smaller than bacteria, about 100 times larger than a virus. Viruses are very specific to certain organisms. Viruses can only invade a cell if they have a protein that fits a certain receptor on that cell's surface. So again, COVID-19 can invade human cells because its spike protein can attach to receptors on human cells. And once they attach to that receptor, they can inject their RNA or DNA and make new copies. If they cannot attach to the specific cell, then they can't invade it, and you can't get sick. This is why you can have a cold, but your dog doesn't catch the cold. The proteins that allow the virus to attach to your cell are only present in your body. The dog's cells are not the same, and the dog's cells don't have those receptors, which means that those viruses cannot invade the dog's cells. Bacteria, on the other hand, have these hair-like pili that allow them to anchor themselves to any body tissue, really, and infect it, replicate all on their own, produce toxins all on their own, and basically infect just about anything. So the same bacteria that infect you can infect a dog, can infect a cat, etc. So bacteria are more capable of affecting a larger variety of organisms because they don't have to invade another cell in order to reproduce. They only have to attach themselves to the tissues. They reproduce on their own. They produce their own toxins, etc. And oftentimes it's the toxins that make us sick, not the bacteria themselves. Fungi or fungi, however you want to pronounce it, are the final class of organism that we're going to look at here. Like plants, they have cell walls. But unlike plants, their cell walls are not made out of cellulose. They're made out of chitin, a different complex carbohydrate. So they have cell walls, but the structure of their cell walls is different. They're made out of different substances, a different carbohydrate. They may have several nuclei within the same cell. So whereas in plants and animals, you will only find one nucleus in each cell, some fungal cells will have more than one nucleus in them. And while they do have cell walls, just like a plant does, they don't have chloroplasts. And because they don't have chloroplasts, they cannot photosynthesize. Here we see all three cell types, plants, animals, and fungal cells, all next to each other so we can compare and contrast them. Look at the similarities, first of all. You see they all have a nucleus in them. This fungal cell has two because it's getting ready to reproduce and form a new cell. They all have mitochondria in them. They all have Golgi apparatus, and they all have endoplasmic reticulum, and they all have these different little structures in them that are very much the same. But there are some differences. First, if we look at the plant cells, there's a chloroplast. There's another chloroplast. There's another chloroplast. Membranes surrounding stacks of membranes. There are no chloroplasts in the animal cell. There are no chloroplasts in the fungal cells. If we look at the plant cell, we see the cell wall around the outside in green. If we look at the fungal cell, we see the cell wall on the outside here in brown. The animal has no cell wall. Look at the plant cell, that's a vacuole. Look at the fungal cell, there's a vacuole. There are no vacuoles in most animal cells. This little structure right here is called a centrosome. The centrosome is responsible for moving some things around during cell division, mitosis, and meiosis. You note that the animal cell is the only one that has one. You don't find a centrosome in the plant cell. You don't have it in the fungal cells. So there's a lot of similarities here, but there's a few minor differences between them that make them unique. I'm going to wrap it up with this little table here. We have all 5 things that we've looked at in this unit. We have bacteria, which are our prokaryotes. We have plants, animals, and fungus. Those are our eukaryotes. And we have the viruses that we talked about in these notes. Structurally speaking, they're different. Whether they have a nucleus or not, they're different. And we want to take a look at all of these different components, make sure that we learn them all. First, as far as cell types are concerned, bacteria are our only prokaryotes. All plants, animals, and fungal cells, they're all eukaryotic. And remember, viruses are not a cell at all. They don't have any of the parts of a cell. They don't have cell membranes. They don't have a nucleus. They don't have any of the other organelles that we talked about. Structurally speaking, both the bacteria and the viruses are very simple structures. Not a whole lot to them. As we saw in the previous slide, plants, animal, and fungal cells are all very similar, with just a few minor differences between them. They're all pretty complex things. As far as the nucleus is concerned, remember prokaryotes don't have a nucleus, and viruses don't either. Because plant, animal, and fungal cells are all eukaryotic, they all have nuclei. One thing they all have in common, they all have nucleic acids. So they all have DNA or RNA. They all have genetic material of some type. As far as reproduction is concerned, bacteria, all prokaryotes, reproduce by binary fission. Your eukaryotic cells by mitosis and meiosis. Remember, viruses cannot reproduce on their own. As far as organelles are concerned, bacteria, they don't have membrane-bound organelles. They do have ribosomes, but they do not have any membrane-bound organelles. All of our eukaryotes do. Viruses do not. We could add a third, one, two, three, four, five, six, seventh row to this if we wanted to, and talk about energy consumption. Bacteria, plants, animals, and fungal cells all consume energy. Plants, animals, and fungal cells all have mitochondria, which they can get their energy that they need to survive. Or bacteria do consume energy, but they have to get it directly from their environment. They have to get it either directly from sunlight or through chemosynthesis from the chemicals in their environment, something we talked about when we did our unit on, or part of the unit on prokaryotes and eukaryotes. So bacteria, plants, animals, fungi, they all get their energy from somewhere. They use energy, they consume energy, either through mitochondria or from getting it directly from their environment. Viruses do not. Viruses do not have metabolic processes, so viruses cannot consume energy. They do not consume energy. Again, one of the things that makes them unique, one of the things that makes them different from living things, one of the reasons why they're not alive. So there you have it. Make sure that your notes are complete. Beyond these notes, you're going to do a few other things for me. Make sure you get everything done so that we're ready to move on when I come back tomorrow.